The morning mist hung heavy over the valley as John Matthews drove his old rust-colored pickup truck down the gravel road that wound through his property. The truck rattled, every bump echoing with the sound of age, like the man driving it. The sun had just begun to break over the horizon, painting the dew-covered fields in gold and amber light. For John, mornings like this were sacred, a quiet reminder of everything he'd worked for, everything his father and grandfather had built before him. His family had owned this land for over 80 years. 100 acres of forest, meadows, and creeks stretched as far as the eye could see. He knew every corner of it, every oak that cast shade in summer, every rock that jutted up from the soil like the earth's old bones, every twist of the river that fed into the dam his grandfather had built by hand. It was more than just property. It was memory. But lately, that piece had begun to crack. Over the past year, construction noises had crept closer and closer, hammers, saws, and bulldozers where there had once been birdsong. Developers had bought up land along the eastern border, promising a modern community for families seeking quiet country living. John had seen the glossy flyers at the grocery store, all clean lawns, smiling faces, and words like tranquility and progress. Progress, he thought bitterly, was just another word for invasion. That morning, as he reached the edge of his property near the old fence line, he froze. His heart thudded once, hard. Then again, where there should have been tall grass and trees, there were rooftops. Dozens of them, freshly painted, perfectly spaced, and lined with identical mailboxes gleaming in the sun. A brand new asphalt road cut through his pasture like a scar. Children's bikes leaned against fences. Someone's sprinkler hissed over a square patch of green lawn that hadn't existed 2 months ago. He stepped out of his truck, boots crunching on the gravel, and stared in disbelief. No, he whispered, shaking his head. No, no, no. He climbed over the old fence, his fence, and walked toward the nearest house. The smell of new paint filled the air. A woman was out front, watering flowers in a garden bed. She looked up, startled. "Can I help you?" she asked politely. John blinked, speechless for a moment. This is my land," he stammered. "These houses, they're built on my property." The woman frowned. "Oh, sir, I think you're mistaken. This is Silver Creek Meadows. We bought our home from Greenleaf Developments. Everything here was approved by the HOA. HOA. The word hit him like a slap. Homeowners Association. He muttered something and turned away, his hands trembling. Back in the truck, he gunned the engine and drove straight into town, the old Chevy roaring like thunder down the empty road. Dash dash dash. At the Silver Creek Town Hall, the air smelled of old paper and stale coffee. John slammed the heavy wooden door behind him and marched to the front desk. The young receptionist looked up, startled, as the bell above the door jingled. "I need to speak with someone about property rights," John said, voice tight. She blinked. "Do you have an appointment?" "I don't need an appointment," he snapped. "They built 35 damn houses on my land." She hesitated, clearly unsure how to respond, and called someone on the intercom. A few minutes later, Mr. Collins, the city engineer, came out, a tall, balding man with glasses and an expression that seemed permanently unimpressed. "Mr. Matthews," Collins said, flipping through a folder. "Yes, we've received your letter before. You're referring to Parcel 18A, correct?" "That's right," John said sharply. "Owned by my family since 1940. Collins sighed. "According to our records, Parcel 18A was transferred to the Silver Creek Development Authority 2 years ago after a zoning reassessment. It was deemed unoccupied and unoccupied." John's voice rose, echoing off the marble walls. "I live here. My fences are still up. My dam's still running. My grandfather's name is still carved into the deed." Collins glanced at the papers, avoiding John's eyes. "There must have been a clerical error. But the homes are built now, Mr. Matthews. Sold. People live there. There's not much that can be done." John's hands curled into fists. "You're telling me someone stole my land, and you're just, what? Going to shrug it off?" "Sir, please calm down," the receptionist said nervously. "Calm down," John thundered. "They built over my pasture. They bulldozed my father's stone wall." Before Collins could reply, another man entered, Derek Thompson, a slick-looking representative from the HOA, wearing a tailored suit and a smug grin. "Mr. Matthews," he said smoothly, "I understand you're upset, but this was all legally approved years ago. You should have attended the zoning hearings." "I didn't even know there were hearings," John growled. "Well," Derek said with a shrug, "that's not really our fault. Maybe next time keep up with your mail." John stared at him, silent for a moment. His jaw clenched. "You took my family's land. You didn't build on empty space. You built on history." Derek chuckled softly. "History doesn't pay property taxes." The words hung in the air like poison. John turned without another word and stormed out of the office, his boots echoing down the hallway. Outside, the cold wind hit him hard. He climbed back into his truck, gripping the steering wheel so tight his knuckles went white. His heart was pounding. With anger, yes, but something deeper too. Betrayal. The drive home felt longer. The houses he passed, the ones sitting proudly on his stolen land, seemed to mock him. Laughter echoed from a backyard where children were playing. The smell of barbecue drifted in the air. It was as if his family's legacy had been erased overnight and replaced by picket fences and HOA rules. He parked by the dam and sat in silence. The dam was an old but sturdy structure, a curved wall of stone and steel, built by his grandfather in the 1950s to control the Silver Creek Reservoir. The same reservoir now supplied water to the shiny new homes below. John had maintained it his whole life, patching cracks, oiling valves, ensuring the floodgates worked like clockwork. It was his duty, and his pride. As he stood there, the setting sun turned the water copper red. He could hear the deep rumble of the current behind the dam's wall. So much power, so much force, just waiting behind steel and concrete. "They took what was mine," he whispered to the wind. "But they forgot what keeps them safe." He walked closer to the control shed, brushing his hand across the cold metal lever that controlled the main release. It had been years since he'd even considered opening it fully, not since the last major flood, decades ago. But now, the thought lingered. If the town could take his land without asking, maybe it was time they learned what happens when you take what doesn't belong to you. John didn't move the lever that night. He simply stood there, staring at the churning water. Somewhere deep inside him, something shifted. Not rage, not yet, but a slow, simmering realization. He had lost everything the lawful way. Maybe it was time to let nature take it back the natural way. As the moon rose over Silver Creek, John Matthews walked back to his cabin, the sound of rushing water following him like a promise. The following week drifted by in eerie silence. For the first time in years, the valley didn't feel like home. The sound of construction had stopped, replaced by the hum of lawnmowers, barking dogs, and the distant laughter of new families who now called his land theirs. From his cabin on the hill, John Matthews could see everything. Every roof, every streetlight, every fake smile plastered across what the HOA proudly called Silver Creek Meadows. The name alone made his stomach twist. They'd taken his father's name, Silver Creek, and turned it into a marketing slogan. Every morning, he watched them through binoculars. Kids waiting for the school bus, women jogging in yoga pants, men watering their lawns, all pretending this place was their paradise. They had no idea they were living on stolen ground, the soil soaked with the sweat of his ancestors, the same dirt that had grown his family's crops for generations. Sometimes he could almost hear his father's voice, deep and steady, the way it used to echo through the woods. "Take care of the land, Johnny, and it'll take care of you." John had done that all his life. But the land didn't belong to him anymore. At least not on paper. He started noticing little things. The creek running lower than usual, the faint metallic hum in the dam's pipes when he inspected it. The HOA's new irrigation systems were pulling more water than ever before. Their lawns were green while the upstream grass around his cabin turned brittle and brown. They were bleeding the land dry. His land. One evening, John went down to the dam with his lantern. The night air was cool, the sound of frogs echoing from the reeds. He unlocked the small control shed and stepped inside. The air smelled of old oil and rust. In front of him stood the main valve controls, heavy steel levers, gauges, and switches that managed the pressure of the entire reservoir. He ran his fingers over the largest lever, the floodgate control. His grandfather had designed it to release the water in small, controlled amounts during rainy seasons. It had saved the valley from countless floods over the years. But now, the irony stung. The very system built to protect Silver Creek had been feeding the very people who destroyed it. He turned the smaller valve slightly. The water pressure gauge ticked upward. The dam moaned softly, a deep, guttural sound that echoed through the concrete walls. John stepped back, staring at it in silence. "I'm not doing anything wrong," he murmured to himself. "Just letting nature balance itself." But even he knew it wasn't true. The next morning, he sat on his porch sipping black coffee as mist rolled through the valley. From where he sat, he could see the community park the HOA had built. Families gathered there every weekend. Children screamed with joy as they splashed in sprinklers, while parents grilled burgers and waved to each other from folding chairs. It was supposed to be his pasture. He remembered planting wheat there with his father one summer, decades ago. The sun had been hot, the work hard, but they'd laughed, sharing lemonade under the shade of the same oak that now stood fenced off inside the HOA park. He still visited that oak sometimes at night. No one ever saw him. He'd sit beneath its branches, touching the carved initials, J.M. plus L.M. 1967, the mark of his parents' love, made before he was even born. The tree had survived storms, droughts, even lightning strikes. But John knew nothing could protect it from greed. On the fourth night, he drove into town again. Not to argue this time. He was done arguing. He just wanted to see what people were saying. The diner buzzed with conversation. He sat quietly in his corner booth, listening. "I heard the dam's levels are getting high," said one man in a baseball cap. "Yeah. My cousin says they haven't released water in weeks," another replied. "If we get a heavy rain, that thing might overflow." John stirred his coffee slowly, hiding a faint smile. They were right. The levels were rising. Not dangerously yet, but enough to make them nervous. He'd stopped opening the smaller flood valves altogether. Every day, a little more pressure built behind the dam. Pressure that no one but him truly understood. That night, the wind howled across the valley. Clouds gathered, heavy and dark. John stood by his window, looking down at the twinkling lights of Silver Creek Meadows. A storm was coming, both in the sky and in his heart. He walked to his desk and began writing. The words came slow at first, then faster, letters to the mayor, the county office, even the HOA. He wrote of stolen deeds, ignored pleas, and the land that had been ripped from his family's hands. Each letter ended with the same line. "The water remembers." When he finished, he stacked the letters neatly, sealing them with tape. He didn't know if anyone would read them. He doubted it. But someday, when the truth came rushing down the valley, they would understand. 3 days later, he walked the length of the dam again. The water shimmered dark and heavy under the afternoon sun. He could feel it, the weight of it, pressing against the concrete, waiting. He placed his hand on the main control lever, feeling the vibration of power beneath his fingertips. He could open it right now, end everything. But something inside told him to wait. Timing mattered. He looked out at the town. He could see children running, dogs barking, people laughing in the driveways. They were too comfortable. They believed they were safe. "They built their peace on my pain," he said aloud. "Let's see how long it lasts." He turned away, leaving the dam locked but primed. The storm clouds above were gathering again, thick and low, promising rain. Heavy rain. That evening, thunder rolled through the valley like distant drums. John sat in his rocking chair, the smell of wet earth filling the air. The first drops of rain began to fall. He looked toward the dam and whispered softly, almost lovingly, as though speaking to an old friend. "You've been patient long enough." Lightning flashed across the sky, illuminating the dam for a split second, massive, ancient, unyielding. The water churned beneath it, restless and wild. John closed his eyes, the sound of rain drumming against the roof. His heart was calm for the first time in weeks. The decision had already been made. All that remained now was the moment. The storm came at midnight. At first, it was just a whisper, a drizzle tapping against John Matthews's cabin windows, the faint rumble of thunder rolling through the valley. But within minutes, the sky split open. Rain fell in sheets, hammering the tin roof like an angry drum. Lightning flashed, white and wild, turning the forest outside into a tangle of ghostly silhouettes. John stood by the window, watching it. His reflection looked strange. Older, harder, his eyes glinting like the water that swelled behind the dam. The storm had arrived right on time. He put on his raincoat and stepped outside. The night air was cold, sharp with electricity. The wind tore through the trees, carrying the scent of wet earth and pine. Far below, the new homes of Silver Creek Meadows glowed dimly under the storm clouds, streetlights flickering, roofs gleaming under the rain. He began the walk to the dam. Each step squelched in the mud, his boots heavy, his coat plastered to his back. The closer he got, the louder it became, the sound of the reservoir, roaring like something alive. The dam loomed ahead, a dark wall against the lightning-lit sky. Its massive steel gates trembled with pressure. When he reached the control shed, he paused. For a moment, he just stood there, breathing hard, rain streaming down his face. His grandfather's plaque was still nailed to the stone beside the door. Built to protect, never to destroy. He touched it with his hand. "I'm sorry, Grandpa," he whispered. "But they broke what you built long before I did." He unlocked the shed and stepped inside. The old bulbs flickered weakly, casting a yellow glow over the machinery. Water dripped from the ceiling. The main valve gauges shook wildly, needles trembling near the red zone. He stared at the floodgate lever, thick, rusted, and heavy. A single pull would release everything. Thunder boomed overhead. For a second, doubt crept in. He could still walk away. He could let the storm pass, go back to his cabin, pretend the land's wounds didn't matter anymore. But then he remembered the smirk on the HOA man's face. History doesn't pay property taxes. John's jaw tightened. He reached for the lever. It didn't move at first. It groaned, resisting, as if the dam itself hesitated. He threw his weight into it. Metal screeched. The floor shuddered beneath him. Then, with a deep, thunderous roar, the lever snapped downward. The sound that followed was not just water, it was fury. A deafening crack split the night as the floodgates tore open. The reservoir exploded outward, releasing millions of gallons in a single surge. The dam vibrated like a living beast as the torrent ripped through it, water cascading down the valley with unstoppable force. John staggered out into the storm, the rain mixing with the mist of the unleashed flood. From the ridge above the valley, he could see it, a wall of water thundering forward, devouring everything in its path. The first homes went dark instantly. Streetlights blinked out one by one as the water hit, smashing through fences, tearing up lawns, hurling cars down the streets like toys. The perfect little world of Silver Creek Meadows vanished under a rolling tide of mud, debris, and chaos. People ran into the storm, screaming, their voices drowned by the roar. Sirens wailed in the distance, faint and useless. John stood in the rain, unmoving. His coat clung to him, his hat gone, his gray hair plastered to his forehead. The water below reflected the lightning, a twisting river of destruction that carried away everything that wasn't meant to be there. The HOA president, Derek Thompson, stumbled out of his flooded home, shouting orders that no one heard. He slipped in the mud, splashing helplessly as the current rose around him. For a moment, their eyes met, Derek down below, John high on the ridge. "Matthews," Derek screamed over the storm. "You'll pay for this. You hear me?" John didn't shout back. He simply watched as Derek was swept off his feet, vanishing into the black water. "No," John said softly. "You already did." The flood continued until dawn. By the time the storm broke, the valley was unrecognizable. The once pristine neighborhood was gone, replaced by a wasteland of broken timber, crushed cars, and twisted metal. The park was buried. The oak tree, his parents' initials still carved into it, had been torn from the ground, roots and all. John climbed down slowly, boots sinking into the thick, wet earth. The air smelled of mud and ruin. Water still rushed through the streets, carrying pieces of shattered lives, photographs, toys, furniture. He stopped beside what had once been the HOA's welcome sign, now snapped in half. It read, "Welcome to Silver Creek Meadows, a place to belong." He knelt beside it, running his hand across the broken letters. "You never belonged here," he whispered. Dash dash dash. Hours later, the sound of helicopters echoed through the valley. News, crews, rescue teams. They hovered above the wreckage, their floodlights sweeping across the devastation. Reporters would call it a natural disaster. They'd say the old dam failed under the pressure of the storm, an accident, a tragedy. No one would mention the stolen deeds, the ignored letters, or the man who had watched everything from the hill. John walked back toward his cabin, his boots leaving muddy tracks behind him. The sun had started to rise, weak and pale through the fog. The land was quiet now. Birds circled overhead, and in the distance, he could already see new streams forming, cutting through the ground, nature carving new paths where humans had built over old ones. He reached the ridge and turned back one last time. The water glistened like liquid glass, calm again, as if nothing had happened. But the homes, those shining symbols of greed, were gone, erased like chalk under the rain. John took off his soaked hat and held it over his heart. "You're free now," he said softly, not to the people, but to the land itself. The dam stood silent behind him, cracked but still standing, a monument to what it once meant to protect. He could almost hear his father's voice again, carried on the wind. "The land always remembers, son. Always." And for the first time in a long while, John Matthews smiled, not with joy, but with peace. The morning after the flood, Silver Creek Valley was silent. The storm had passed, leaving behind a sky washed pale blue and gray, streaked with soft clouds. Steam rose from the drenched ground, mingling with the smell of wet earth and broken timber. The once bustling neighborhood of Silver Creek Meadows was gone, nothing but a wasteland of splintered homes, overturned cars, and shattered glass. The air was still, heavy with the echo of what had happened. No birds sang, no children laughed, just the distant hiss of receding water and the occasional creak of something collapsing. John Matthews stood on the ridge, motionless. From where he stood, he could see everything, the twisted remains of driveways, rooftops half buried in mud, the park that no longer existed. The mighty oak tree that had stood for 100 years lay on its side, its roots exposed like veins. For a moment, he felt something unexpected, sadness. Not guilt exactly, more like the ache that comes from knowing things can never go back to what they were. He had wanted justice, and justice had come, but it came with a cost. He took off his hat and bowed his head. "Rest now," he whispered, his voice trembling. "You've been through enough. By noon, the rescue teams had arrived. Helicopters thumped overhead, their searchlights sweeping across the muddy fields. Emergency vehicles lined the hill roads. Reporters in raincoats shouted into cameras as they described the scene. Greater than, authorities are still assessing the full extent of the damage after last night's catastrophic dam failure. So far, 12 people are confirmed missing. Greater than, the cause of the disaster remains unknown. Officials say years of neglect and pressure from the storm likely caused the old dam to give way. John listened from his porch as the voices echoed faintly across the valley. Neglect, pressure, storm. They had an explanation for everything, except the truth. No one mentioned the man who had kept that dam alive for 40 years. No one asked how it managed to hold perfectly for decades, only to fail the moment it fed the wrong people. He watched them search the ruins for survivors. Some families had made it out. Others hadn't. The HOA building, once proud and glass-fronted, lay buried beneath 2 feet of silt. Derek Thompson, the HOA president, was never found. To the town, it was tragedy. To John, it was balance. 3 days later, a young reporter named Clara Winslow knocked on his cabin door. She was from a small newspaper out of Mill Creek, a quiet, serious woman with sharp eyes and a notebook always in hand. "Mr. Matthews?" she asked softly when he opened the door. He nodded. "That's me. I've been told you're the land's previous owner," she said. "I was hoping I could ask you a few questions about the dam." John hesitated. Then he stepped aside. "Come in." Inside, the cabin was simple. Wooden walls lined with old photos, a fireplace, and shelves filled with dusty books about soil, rivers, and engineering. Clara looked around quietly, her gaze landing on a framed photograph of a much younger John standing beside the dam with his father. Both men smiled, their arms around each other, the same dam glittering behind them. "You took care of that dam for years, didn't you?" she asked gently. John nodded, staring into the flames. Built it, maintained it, repaired it when no one else would. My grandfather started it. It's been in our family since before Silver Creek had a mayor. Clara hesitated, then said, some people say it wasn't just the storm that caused it to break. John's gaze lifted to hers. His eyes were calm, unreadable. People say a lot of things. Do you regret what happened? She asked quietly. He looked out the window toward the valley, the same valley now covered in mud and silence. The sun was setting, its light turning the wet ground into liquid gold. Regret, he repeated softly. No, you can't regret balance. She frowned slightly. Balance. John leaned back in his chair. When you take from the land without asking, the land takes back. That's balance. Always has been. Always will be. Clara didn't write that down. She just looked at him, a long moment of understanding passing silently between them. She stood to leave. Thank you for your time, Mr. Matthews. He walked her to the door. As she stepped out, she paused and said, they're calling it a natural disaster. John smiled faintly. Nature's been too quiet for too long. Weeks passed. The town began rebuilding. Not the houses, but the story. The mayor held press conferences. Engineers released reports. They spoke of outdated construction, faulty valves, and unexpected rainfall. They promised to rebuild, better, safer, stronger. But they never rebuilt in that valley again. The government declared the area a restricted floodplain. The HOA was dissolved, its records lost in the flood. The land was left untouched, given back to the wilderness. Grass began to grow again through the cracks of the ruined road. The creek returned to its natural path. Birds came back, nesting in the branches of the fallen oak. And John Matthews stayed where he'd always been, in his cabin on the hill, overlooking the land that had finally gone silent again. Sometimes hikers passed by, whispering stories. They said the old man who lived by the dam was cursed, or that he could control the water. Some called him the keeper of Silver Creek. Others swore they'd seen him talking to the river at dusk, as if it could hear him. He didn't mind the stories. In a way, they were right. The water had always been his oldest friend. One morning, months later, Clara Winslow returned. This time she didn't bring her notebook. She just sat with John by the fire, both of them quiet for a long while. They're still trying to figure out what caused the dam to fail, she said finally. John smiled, eyes distant. They'll never find what they're looking for. She turned to him. Because it wasn't man-made. He looked at her, then out toward the valley. The wind rustled through the trees, carrying the faint sound of rushing water below. Because it wasn't failure, he said. Softly. It was restoration. Clara nodded slowly, understanding now. When she left, John stayed by the window, watching the sun rise over Silver Creek. The water glimmered peacefully, calm as glass. No homes, no fences, no noise, just the land, alive again. He whispered to himself, as he did every morning now, the land always remembers. And this time, it finally smiled back.